Hello my amazing tarot friends, Justin Michael, welcome back to my channel, and of course welcome if this is your first time visiting. I appreciate you stopping by as always. We're going to take a look at the Tarot of Jacques Vieville today. I have two versions out. I have this version here by my friend Shell David. He's East Tarot on YouTube. I'm going to put his channel link down below. Please pay him a visit. He's an amazing artist, but he just finished this Vieville restoration. And he sent me the file, so I just printed and cut this yesterday just for this video. And it's a proof, it's not even a final version, so it was really nice of him to do that. And then I have the photo facsimile by Vivial, which is a French company. And this is the facsimile that exists in the French National Library, the Bibliothèque Nationale. So Jacques Vieville was a card maker between 1643 and 64. He existed in the same time as Noblet, basically, and they actually knew each other. They belonged to the same card makers guild. They probably got a lot of their supplies from the same people, possibly used the same engravers. The backs are the same on all three of these decks, which is the black crosses. And then this is the anonymous Tarot of Paris, which we don't know who created it, but there's a lot of talk about the Vieville and the Tarot Paris. Some people believe that there are some engraving quirks, that it looks like it might have been the same engraver or possibly the same print shop. There's a lot of speculation, but because it's the anonymous deck, we don't really know. But there is an indication that it's possibly from the same card makers. If not, it's at least from the same neighborhood, because what the environment that these guys existed in was a very tough environment to be a card maker. This is in the middle of the 17th century in France. It's under the reign of Louis XIV, the Sun King. He was, spending money on the construction of Versailles and dumping money on the wars and everything else. And he was bankrupting France, and they were squeezing the third estate, basically, of taxes. And a part of that was the card makers. And playing cards were basically considered a vice of, the third estate, really. Even though everybody sort of played cards and gambled, it was really considered like a vice of the poor. And it was a huge commodity, and it was taxed heavily. So what they did was, and Flornoy in his book actually says that playing cards generated more income than almost anything, like salt included, like everything. There were like 6,000 gambling houses in Paris alone at that time. It was extremely, they didn't have many other forms of entertainment. They didn't have television and the internet back then. It was, playing cards was a huge thing, playing cards and books. And you got to realize, printing was a relatively new thing for them. It was a huge part of entertainment, sort of like the internet is today, and so this was a big industry. And one way they kept track of it for taxes was they controlled the paper supplies, and then the paper was distributed to the card makers daily by a counter who would stamp and approve, and they would pay taxes on the paper every day. And they probably couldn't make mistakes, and it was really probably a very tough business, But also what the government did was they rounded them up and sort of put them all in the same area, And Flornoy talks about this in his book too, but it's very well documented, It's almost like they existed in a card maker's ghetto, They all were refined to this one area so that they could be surveilled and controlled by the police. So it's just a really interesting kind of thing, and so they all existed in the same time and space, and so that's why I wanted to show you them all today. So let's just take a look at the Tarot Parish first, because this is probably the most unique of the three decks I have. And I'm just going to briefly show you this because this is about Vieville, but I want to show you. So this is a version, I believe this is Vieville too. Well, it's from the Bibliothèque Nationale. I don't know who printed this. But maybe it was Grimaud. I don't know. I really don't know. It's an interesting deck. So there's those, black backs with the crosses. Oh, well, this is the world. Let me show you the Magician first. So the only thing this really has in common with the Vivial is that it's non-standard pattern. It's very different from the modern Tarot de Marseille that we see. You know, like the Convert and the Dodal and the Noble is very similar. You know, this is extremely different. It almost looks Italian, and even the borders, which are common thing you see with the Italian decks because they, you know, fold the edges over. I don't know exactly, and usually they match the backs, but this doesn't. You know. But other than that, it doesn't really have much in common. But it was told to me that, you know, there's some evidence that something about the engraving is very similar to the Vivial. Just going to go through these very quickly. This has titles, which is interesting because the Vivial doesn't have any titles. And it's a very early French deck. Now, you can't even really call it Tarot de Marseille because it's very, very different. Sun, Judgment, and the World. And the pips are really different. I mean, you know. Okay, so that's the Tarot Parish. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the Vivial, but I'm going to show you both versions at the same time because, you know, kill two birds with one stone. So like I said, this is something I printed on my own, but my friend Shell David was the designer, so we're going to put this one out. And we're going to look at the Vieville version, which is a facsimile. So first off, the very interesting thing about this, so I have the Two of Pentacles here. I love that Two of Pentacles. Really starting to grow on me. This was a deck I was never really drawn to because it's so different from the others that it's just, you know, I came to it last. But it doesn't have titles, you know, on the deck. And that's very common in like older decks. You know, you see some Tarocchi decks without, especially Italian decks, without titles. But what's interesting is they're on the Ace, and the Ace of Pentacles and the Two of Cups. So you have the titles on here. So that's kind of something cool. It's almost like a reference for the game even. You know, you can see like who's who pretty much on these cards. And that's very interesting. So one thing I read about this, one of the first things I read about this deck was by Jean-Claude Flornoy, and he told a story about, you know, he painted the whole picture about what I just told you with the card makers and how they were heavily taxed and so forth. But he tells a story about how, you know, all the card shops were raided on the same day, and the printing blocks were wiped out. So the cops raided the places, and they were armed with chisels and planes, and they basically cleared out all the printing blocks so that the government could keep track of all the blocks and somehow, you know, regulate better so they wouldn't print any unauthorized, untaxed copies. And so Flornoy suggests that the Vieville was wiped out, you know, in one such event. And that an engraver had to recarve the images. And he says that because, you know, they had to start fresh, they took a sheet and they transposed it onto the blocks, and then they recarved it, and that's why the images appear backwards. Like if you look at the table here, you know, it's very much backwards, you know, and the wand is in the opposite hand, and you'll see that a lot, you know, in this deck. So you'll see, for instance, it's a lot different from the Noble. Now it's different artwork and so forth, but he implies that it's backwards from all the other decks. But Ross Caldwell, who is he's an author, and I'm going to link his information down below. He has a couple of books, but he's the founder and admin of the Tarot History Group. He's been extremely helpful to me. Just a really nice guy, and that group is just a really great resource for research. But he told me that actually tarot decks were exempt from that order. So when the government ordered all the wood blocks to be destroyed, that Tarot was actually exempt. And I think he told me something like Kris Hadar also argued that. He's the guy who created the Veritable tarot, and he said that all the wood blocks were erased, and they had to start over. But Ross makes a good point in that it doesn't cover the areas that were outside of France's power, like for instance Avignon and some of the other places where Tarot de Marseille was being made were outside of the government, so all of the blocks couldn't be wiped out, for that reason. So it's interesting. Either way, we don't really know. I mean, we can take a wild guess. Maybe Flornoy was right, maybe he wasn't. But I did see documentary evidence that Ross did send me that disproved that all the wood blocks, because tarot decks were exempt from that for whatever reason. I don't know anything beyond that. But so that could explain. It kind of disproves what Flornoy was arguing, but in the same sense, it does appear to be backwards, So maybe it was still recarved. Maybe the government didn't destroy the plates. Maybe they were just recarved and transposed. But Ross makes a good point to me. He's like, there's no way of knowing which way was the original, because they were probably, transposed on wood blocks so often, by card makers, that we just don't know what the original was and what's not. So I found that really interesting, that story though, and I thought it was worth mentioning. But again, you have the Empress and the beginning part of the majors, so you don't have the titles, but you have a lot of the same Tarot de Marseille imagery, and that's clearly like the influence. And this is Noble here. So it's very interesting. And if we show you the Dodal, it's sort of the same thing. I mean, well, actually, it sits the same way as the Dodal. So, I don't know. That's interesting. I'm going to keep the Dodal out because I want to show you something. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention too about the papes, and this is something that I read. But if you notice the papal tiara, you can see the entire thing where in Noble, it's cut off, and the same thing in Dodal as well. It's cut off completely. So that was one kind of cool little difference. Sorry about that. Let me get back to this. Okay, so we have, similar kind of Hierophant, but in a different style, obviously. And I love Shell's version. The colors are just so beautiful. I hope you're able to see all the beautiful violets that he used. And just the colors look so good. Such a good job. Now, this is an interesting card worth mentioning too. And this was a big discussion on the Tarot History Facebook group, pretty recently. The Lover's card of the Vivial has 3 males on it, whereas, like, for instance, the Noble has 2 females and a male. So, like, 2 females, a male getting struck. You see various Lovers cards all throughout the Tarot history, really. Some of them have 2, some of them have 2 people, a guy and a girl and an arrow. Some of them have 2 men, a father and a son. I've seen all sorts, but this has 3. And some people were speculating that this is a female, but I don't actually think that it's, not that it really matters to me, but to me it looks like a groom, someone who's in love, a father and a brother, and the brother's like, you're gonna be okay, and he's like sending him off to get married. He's all nervous, because it's a big step. He's now fallen in love and he's going to go get married and his life's going to change. And that just seems to make sense to me. Now, I don't know what it originally was, or if it even matters, but it's very interesting, So now you have card 7 is Justice instead of the Chariot. So the order of the trumps is different in the Vivial. So this is a card I want to talk about because, it's very different from, say, like the Convert, for instance. It's almost similar to Dodal and Noblet, and this is another one of Shell's decks. But you can see the canopy has the same kind of squiggly design, and it has the plate, but different shape, obviously, but still same sort of symbolism. And but what's interesting about the Vivial is the human faces on the horse. It's a really trippy deck. I've fallen in love with this deck, actually. It wasn't something that I was immediately drawn to. I don't think I was ready for it, but in the place I'm at in my tarot kind of journey, and I'm really kind of caught the tarot history bug lately, I think I was ready for it, and I'm really starting to appreciate the Belgium decks as well. So here's another one. So now we have 9 instead of the Hermit. You have Strength. So that's another thing about the card orders, and they've changed many times in many different decks. Okay, so now we have the Wheel. Is card 10. I don't know why I'm showing you Noblet too, but very similar, It's a typical wheel. And let's see, next we have the Hermit at card 11. So the order of the trumps has changed, and I'm sure there are other decks with the same order, Now this is probably my favorite card in the deck, and the Hangman is one of my favorites anyway, but I just love this Hangman, and it's always upright, and I think that might be a mistake. I don't know, people will probably disagree with me there, and please leave your comments down below. It's always important for you to share your thoughts down below, and as a viewer you should always look at the notes and the comment section, because often if I get something wrong I'll add to the notes of the video, and then there's also important discussions that sometimes take place down the bottom if somebody disagrees with me. But the Hangman is shown upright here because you have the Roman numerals, which seem to be added as almost like an afterthought. They weren't originally on there like this. They're sort of written in like as an afterthought. So it's very possible the person who was adding the numbers on there, the order, might have did what we all do, which is occasionally we make the mistake of turning the Hangman upright, and because there's no titles, it's very easy to do. So, but I just love that Hangman. It's a really great Hangman. Shells just looks phenomenal. It's really just such a good job. Beautiful death card. Those great, violets in there. Just really pretty. So now we're getting to the section where this starts to differ from the Noblet, and then the Noblet is going to be useless, and I'm probably going to show you some other things, some other decks I have handy. So Temperance, pretty standard. Now this is one of my favorite cards as well. So this is the Devil that I fell in love with, that got me into the Vandenboer and the Hotel, and then of course Vivial. It's the very Belgium looking devil, and I couldn't figure out where that came from. I've never seen a devil like that, but then I saw, there it is. So this is the Vindalatura, which is a Bolognese tarot. This is one of the areas that it likely came from. You know, people say, well, Ferrara and Tarot Bolognese, basically, yeah, is where they say that Tarot de Marseille originally comes from. There's some other interesting decks that you can look at, but that devil looks very similar to that. You know, it's a different style, but still seems like it could come from that tradition. And the next cards are going to really illustrate that point, because, okay, so this is really interesting. So now, instead of the tower, you have what La Foudre, which is lightning. But we know it as the tower card in tarot. But I really believe that the people in like the 18th, 19th, and 20th century got it wrong about this card. I think the tower is just a prop. I think the important part of the card is actually the lightning. And that's illustrated here. And so Ross Caldwell from the Tarot History Group calls this the hierarchy of light section of the trump cards. And he makes an excellent point. I'm going to try and add some photos that he brought up, because it was really very helpful. It really illustrated the point. But he calls it the hierarchy of the lights, and he says that this is the lightning card. And the reason they did this was to help people remember, you know, the value of these cards kind of all together, because there were no titles on the cards. So the hierarchy of light starts with lightning. And on the, by the way, this card is amazing, and you can't really see what's going on in the facsimile, but actually on shells you can really see it. That's a shepherd, and he's got sheeps, looks like, or goats, probably sheep, and he's hiding under a tree from the lightning. You know, that's what's going on there. So what he means by the hierarchy of light. Okay, I'm going to show you. This is a Bolognese tarot. So you have first the lightning, which is like the smallest kind of flashes of lights in the sky. Then you have the small specks of light, which are the stars. Then you have the big luminous moon, and then you have the bright sun, and that's the hierarchy of lights. So it's lightning, star, moon, and sun. And to me that makes a lot of sense, and that changes my understanding of the tower card, you know, because it's really the lightning card. And you know, so at least it's going to put a more emphasis on the lightning part in my readings, which I thought was cool. But of course you can see the influence here. Well, let me show you the rest of the card. So that's the lightning. Okay, and we're going to look at the star. You have like an astronomer. I don't know how that... Yeah, the star. Okay, that star is interesting. Okay, but I'm going to show you. Okay, so they kind of have it backwards here. Instead of on the star, they have it on the moon, the astronomer. But it's kind of similar. You know, they might have mixed it up or, you know, changed a few things. But it's really, really interesting. But now, when I'm looking at the traditional star that we see in Tarot de Marseille, I have an interesting sheet here called the Cary Sheet, which is something that my friend Marco pointed out to me, Marco Benedetti. But he says that, you know, he showed this in our interview when we were talking and everything. But if you just look at the star here, you know, that's kind of very similar to what you see in Tarot de Marseille. And then the pips, if you look at the pips there, this is all we have, just this one sheet. But what's interesting about this sheet is that it's from Milan, but possibly as early as the year 1500. So this is one of the early examples. Look at the moon card. You have the crayfish. I mean, that's so Tarot de Marseille. And that's just, to me, is just incredible, you know. And this is, some people call this the missing link between Italian tarocchi and French tarot. And there was obviously a cross-pollination that was going on, you know, between France and Italy. You know, at some point, they even think that possibly tarot died out and was reintroduced by the French to Italy. You know, there was just constant influences back and forth. Okay, so we have the moon here, which again is, you know, really interesting. And you have a tree in this moon, in the moon, just like you have in the lightning. And somebody told me that that was In alchemy, there's 2 trees, but I don't know how true that is. Probably not. But in alchemy, there's 2 trees: the tree of light and the tree of shadow, or something like that, or like the tree of, you know, you see that a lot. I mean, the tree of good in Rachel Pollack's deck. You know, she what is that? The Raziel Tarot. She has the tree of good, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, or something. She has 2 different trees, but that's interesting. One's in the moon and one's in lightning. So I don't know. Something to think about, maybe in a reading. Vastly different from this. This is more what you see in the Bolognese type tarot. Now the sun is interesting because this reminds me of Rider-Waite-Smith. You know, you look at that and you're like, wow. You know, you see a boy on a horse, and it looks like the modern tarot. You know. So that's it. That's the hierarchy of light, you know, from the tower or lightning to the sun. And now we have Judgment. They look so nice, these colors. And the World. Really beautiful deck from Shel David. In fact, I'm not going to show you this. Okay, so we're going to end with the Fool. And I'm not going to do any more comparisons. I'm just going to show you the rest of Shel's deck here, because he did such a good job. And I think just take a look through the rest of the deck here, just to show the rest of the Vivial. Okay, so we got the Fool there, which is absolutely beautiful. And so these are what the pips look like. Now, keep in mind, this is the Ace, and you see this kind of thing in the Belgium Tarot, which I'm going to do next. In my next video, I'm going to show the Belgium decks, but you know, very beautiful pips in this deck. I love that. And Shel did such a nice job, too. I mean, look at the colors of that. Spectacular. There's our 2 of Cups with the, that's the majors. Oh, obviously I have the wrong one here. Yeah, and so you have the majors written on the Ace of Pentacles. Okay, so here are some of the core cards. We have the Pages, Knights, and a Queen, and then you have the Kings. And then here are the Aces. Except for the Ace of Pentacles, I think I showed you that already. 2s. I love this two of Pentacles. It was so different from what I was used to seeing, but now I love it. I absolutely love it. I'm just so in love with this 2 of Pentacles. I don't know. Originally, I was like, oh, it's kind of weird. It's not like, you know, what we're used to seeing in the other French decks, but it's just such a cool looking 2 of Pentacles. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and again, please leave your comments below. They're really important, especially for these types of videos that I do where I'm showing decks and talking about history. I really like to hear from you guys. If you have an alternative point of view, you know, please share it below for other people, you know, because tarot history is an ongoing thing. There's a lot of guesswork and a lot of, you know, people disagree on a lot of things, so it's always good to have the conversation going. And I hope you enjoyed this, and I appreciate you tuning in. Until next time, love and peace. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.